Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday, the Leading Change episode, this week with Lakshmi Ramaseshan. Hi Lakshmi, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, it's great to be here again.
Absolutely. So this week we want to, or today rather, we want to dive into change management, change leadership, which is, of course, one of the aspects that permeates the Scrum Master role and, of course, also the Agile Coach role. So tell us a story of a change process, something that you were directly involved with, and then walk us through those steps, those tips, those tricks, and tools you learned at that time and still apply today.
Yeah. For me, everything goes back to showing teams you work with and an organization that you work with about what great looks like, right? It's really important. I didn't really realize the value of that until there were certain points in my journey where, I was like, that's what was missing. The team didn't know what great looked like. And then in addition to that, really emphasizing what the value of a process can be and what it can bring to the organization. So our organization, the one that I work with today, I work with Pacquiolin. We have a culture of doing inceptions. Inceptions were derived from lean inceptions back in 2004 and was developed by ThoughtWorks. So when I joined the organization about a year ago now, we had conducted a few inceptions with teams. But there was still a lot of skepticism about the process, right? The perception was inceptions are too expensive because too many people are involved. It takes too much time. There was perceptions about it's too hard to do. Teams didn't really see the value in preparing for it. One of the highlights that came out of an assessment we did, a team maturity assessment we did, indicated that the teams were lacking clarity and they didn't really understand how the things they were doing day to day were aligned to a bigger purpose, right? So as a coach, I was like, inceptions is a great way for us to get there, but we obviously have to do something to figure out how do we educate the organization on the value of it. And how do we talk to our teams in a way that we really make them understand that this is actually here to help them, right? It's just not a process for process sake. It's actually going to bring a lot of value to the team, and it's going to help them deliver better initiatives. And that is what everybody wants. So that was my one process where I had to sort of think about how are we going to get this across the organization? So what we did is we created inception training for the entire organization. We set up a checklist. I know we don't really like rules as Agilists, but I thought about it more as conditions for success because we needed teams to understand what good preparation looks like. And then we needed to partner with, the VP of engineering and product to say, okay, how do we measure how we're doing? So let's say we do an inception with a team. How do we know how that went? And let's figure out a way we can measure that, right? So we set up some measurements in place. We also set up retrospectives for the inception process to see how the team's experience was, what things we could surface and what we could improve on. So all of this together really defined what great looked like for an inception. So that's what we implemented.
Absolutely. I like the fact that you started from, understanding that there's a problem here. First, of course, one of the problems was that some people liked inceptions and others didn't. That was one of the problems. But then you started with this team maturity assessment and you found out, okay, so where's the gap? Like what are the teams struggling with? And I think that's for me, that's a great example of applying the lean mindset. So instead of coming up with all kinds of potential processes and even ways to communicate it, just first start with the problem. And here the customers are the teams, because in our organizations, we want the teams to succeed, right? As you said, we want the teams to know what great looks like, and then of course get the tools to get there. So I liked how you started that. Like, what was the genesis of that idea of running the team maturity assessment, and where did you get the inspiration to define and perform, set up and organize that team maturity assessment?
Yeah, I think it was sort of like one of those things where we needed to do a maturity assessment for the teams to just understand where they were in the adoption of lean and agile, right? And what happened is it all sort of culminated at this point, because at the point where we were saying, I think this was a hypothesis, right? We were like, well, we think inceptions are going to provide a lot of value to the organization. But when we did the team maturity assessment, it was actually not for us to figure out, whether the lack of clarity was the number one thing. We just wanted to understand where the teams need support, right? And it ended up being the number one thing that got highlighted. In addition to that, we also listened in on retrospectives and found that the common theme that always came up in retrospectives is, why am I doing what I'm doing? I don't understand what is my North Star. I don't understand the goals of this initiative, right? So it seemed like in multiple ways, we were all coming back to the same thing. And we were almost forced to look at it as a leadership team and say, we need to do something about this, because this is a common theme our teams are raising to us. And if we don't solve this for them, we're not going to be able to build those high performing teams like we want to.
Absolutely. And for me, that's where it starts. Like, very often I get engaged as a consultant, as a coach, to quote unquote define and install a process. And for me, that's the opposite end of
Yes.
where my work should start, right?
Right.
And what I do, which I imagine is what many of our colleagues do also, is to first figure out what's the biggest struggle that the teams are facing, right? Like, there's this one client where the biggest struggle that the teams were facing was not knowing what the process was like. Okay, at that point, you can have a training about the process. But in other teams, the problem was not having support from the product owners. Like, they wanted support but didn't get. So of course there, the process is not going to help. You need to figure out, are the product owners missing certain skills? Are they too far, organizationally speaking, too far from the teams to even know that the teams need their support? Like that, I think for me, that's the key aspect. Like, really listen to what the problems are and tackle one at a time, right? We don't need to tackle all of the problems at the same time.
Absolutely. Actually, a conversation that I had just yesterday with an engineering manager came to my mind, because there's one team in our organization that's moving from a very reactive support-based environment to a more product development-based environment, right? And so they're getting ready for their first inception. So we want to make sure that they know what the process looks like. They know what this journey is going to be like. One of the things that came up from this team that this engineering manager relayed to me is, the team feels like there's a lot of meetings, right? That's all she said. I was like, okay, well, give me some context, right? And so I was like, well, the thing is, we really need to understand where that concern is coming from. Is it because the meeting is not being run well? Or is it that they don't understand the value of the meeting in the first place, right? So before we take the meetings away from the calendar, let's first talk about what the team considers as a meeting. Because I don't consider team events where the team needs to come together to align on the work that they're doing as a team as a meeting, because it's something to help the team do their job better, right? So going back to what you're saying, Vasco, that really resonates with me, because it's easy for us as Scrum Masters and coaches to just be on the surface and listen to the problem and be like, oh, let's just go into solution mode. But it's important to understand the root cause, because otherwise you're not going to really address the problem.
Yeah, don't go too soon into solution mode. That's a great tip. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role, we'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.